Hi, I'm Vespera. My sister once sobbed in my arms at our father's funeral, saying I was all she had left. Last night, at her wedding, she laughed with her new family, as they sat me near the kitchen, called me staff, and toasted everyone, except me. She smiled when they mocked me, but when I stood and asked, "Do you even know who I am?" they went pale, because the truth wasn't just about a seat or a speech. It was about every stolen dollar, every forged signature, every time I stayed silent. Until now. Before we dive in, what time are you listening and where from? Drop it in the comments. This isn't just a wedding story. It's what happens when the forgotten one finally speaks. They say family doesn't need formalities, that love doesn't need an RSVP. But when you find out your only sister's wedding is happening through a forwarded email, you start questioning all the things they say. My name's Vespera. I'm 38 years old, the youngest daughter, the quiet one, the one who left Charleston to make something of herself in New York, while my sister Seraphine stayed home and made herself a brand. We used to be close. At least, that's what I told myself for years. She was all high school courts and debutante brunches, while I was the kid with paint under my fingernails, reading contracts instead of horoscopes. She always had a way of making everyone feel like they were orbiting her. Even me. Especially me. We hadn't spoken in a while, just the occasional happy birthday text or a photo she'd tag me in out of obligation. So when a college friend forwarded me the digital invite saying, "Figured maybe you didn't get this?" I stared at my screen for a full minute. I hadn't. There was no call, no mailed envelope with my name in calligraphy, just a blurry JPEG image with floral borders and Seraphine's name in all caps, paired with a man I'd only heard about once in passing. A week. That's how long I had until the wedding. I told myself it must have been an oversight. Maybe the invitation got lost in the mail. Maybe she figured someone else had already told me. Maybe. I booked the flight. Charleston greeted me with humid air and oak trees too old to forget the past. I rented a car, didn't even stop at the hotel. I drove straight to the venue for the rehearsal dinner. If they were surprised to see me, I didn't want to give them time to prepare. The parking lot was full of glossy cars. I wore a simple navy dress and flats, something neutral, unthreatening. I brushed my hair behind my ears, wiped the sweat from my palms, and stepped toward the main entrance. It was a converted plantation house, white pillars, green manicured lawn, a marquee that read, "The future Mr. and Mrs. Penbrook." Not a single mention of Seraphine's maiden name, ours. Inside, people milled around with champagne and practiced politeness. No one looked up. I walked toward the check-in table, where a young woman in a headset smiled brightly. "Name?" she asked without looking up. "Vespera Wynn." Her fingers paused over the tablet. She typed, waited, typed again. "I'm sorry, I don't see, are you with catering?" "No," I said evenly. "I'm the bride's sister." The woman blinked, then looked at the man next to her, who wore a black suit and an earpiece. He leaned in, whispered something. Then his gaze turned to me, scanning like I was smuggling something. A woman I didn't recognize, tall, thin, maybe early 50s, walked over. She wore the expression of someone used to running committees and getting her way. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice wrapped in Southern sugar. "This area is for confirmed guests. Do you have your badge?" "My badge?" I echoed. She offered a tight smile. "Name tag, access ID. Rehearsal access was sent out last week. Were you confirmed through the wedding planner?" I looked her straight in the eye. "I'm Seraphine's sister. I don't need a badge to be here." The woman's smile didn't fade, but her eyes changed. "Oh, I see." She looked me up and down, noticing the dress, the shoes, the lack of glitter or polish. "I thought her sister lived abroad." "I live in New York." "Well," she said, tilting her head, "I suppose we all have our own definitions of abroad." There it was. That quiet dismissal, polite on the surface, brutal underneath. She turned, said something to the staff. They nodded and moved on. I stood there for a moment, breathing in air that tasted like gardenia and cheap validation. No one came to greet me. No one said, "We've been waiting for you." I looked around the room, saw Seraphine across the way, laughing with the groom's parents. Her back was to me, she hadn't seen me, or maybe she had, and chose not to. I didn't know which would hurt more. I stepped outside. The sun had begun to dip. A golden light spilled over the porch steps and lawn. Somewhere inside, silverware clinked and music started. I leaned against the railing, pressing my palms flat on the cool wood. "It's not about you," I whispered to myself. "It's her day. Don't ruin it." But something cracked, not loudly, not all at once. It was the silence, the kind that seeps in through the cracks, like water under a door. I realized then, it wasn't a mistake, it wasn't an oversight, it was a message. I stood outside that glass door, heart burning, and realized maybe I wasn't really invited at all. I stepped back from that glass door, took one breath, then another. The clatter of silverware and the soft murmur of laughter inside spilled out each time someone walked through, brushing past me like I was invisible. Eventually, a younger man in a black vest, clearly a server, opened the door and held it without a word. I nodded once, grateful for something resembling civility, and stepped inside. The room was stunning. Soft golden lights shimmered above elegant white tables. Candles flickered in tall glass cylinders. Everything was curated, down to the music playing low beneath the sound of champagne flutes clinking. And yet, as I walked in, no one looked up. Not a single head turned. It was like I had walked into someone else's dream where I didn't belong. I moved slowly through the room, scanning the tables, eyes searching for my name. Nothing. Rows of carefully calligraphed name cards rested in tiny gold stands. Aunt Loretta, Mr. and Mrs. Penbrook Sr., Jenna, bridesmaid. All the names in their proper places. But mine? Nowhere. A woman with a headset caught sight of me lingering and walked over. "Hi, can I help you find your seat?" Her tone was pleasant, practiced. I gave her my name. "Oh," she said, hesitating just long enough to sting. "Let me check." She turned toward the back, whispered something to another staffer, then returned with a tight smile. "Right this way." We weaved through the room, past tables full of familiar faces I hadn't seen in years. My cousin Tara was laughing so loud I could hear her across the venue. Uncle Jeff, who used to let us sneak mints from his jacket pocket, was leaning in close with someone from the groom's side. No one noticed me passing, or if they did, they chose not to. Finally, we stopped. A table tucked against the far wall, half visible from the main seating area, squeezed between the hallway to the kitchen and the side exit for the staff. "This is yours," the woman said, placing her hand lightly on the back of a chair. I noticed it immediately. Unlike the other cushioned chairs with white satin bows, mine was wooden and bare. There was no centerpiece on the table, no name card, just a folded napkin and a water glass. I sat down slowly, adjusting my posture as two other people arrived, a man in a vendor polo shirt and a woman with a clipboard. They gave me polite nods before diving into quiet conversation about delivery times and floral arrangements. One of them glanced at me. "You with the planners team?" I shook my head lightly. "No, I'm family." His brows lifted, just a little. "Oh, sorry, just assumed." I didn't answer, not because I didn't have words, but because none of them were worth offering in that moment. The sound of the room shifted then. People began clapping lightly. I turned to see Seraphine walk in from the far entrance. She looked like something out of a bridal magazine. Flowing dress, hair curled just right, makeup flawless, the kind of effortless beauty she'd always chased and now clearly perfected. All eyes followed her as she moved through the space like she owned it. Then she looked directly at me, our eyes locked for a second that felt like forever. I waited for something. A nod, a wave, maybe even surprise. Instead, she gave me a soft, closed-mouth smile, one that didn't touch her eyes. The kind of smile you give someone when you want them to know they're being watched, categorized, confirmed. Then she turned away. She didn't break stride, didn't come over, didn't say hello. I looked down at the napkin on my lap. Stark white, no embroidery. Every other table had monogrammed gold thread napkins with the couple's initials. This was the kind of detail you don't notice unless you're meant to. I unfolded the napkin slowly, ran my fingers over the fabric like I was smoothing something heavier than cotton. A moment later, a woman sat beside me, mid-50s, silver hair, lots of pearls. She smiled at me with the kind of friendliness that's just short of genuine. Oh, I didn't realize the bride had another sister. I kept my tone even. Yes, she does. You're not in the program, she added, glancing at the booklet in her hand. Are you helping coordinate? You look so calm. Must be good under pressure. I tilted my head, gave her a polite smile. Not exactly. She blinked, clearly unsure of what box to place me in, then turned back to her tablemate. The air around me thickened, not with heat, but something else, something like the awareness that you're in a room full of people who've already decided who you are, that you're convenient background, wallpaper. And I realized something, sitting in that chair, tucked near the trash hallway. I wasn't being ignored. I was being placed. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd chosen where to put me, out of the way, near the edge, present but not counted, dressed up and silenced. And Seraphine had smiled. The toast came after dinner. She stood near the center of the room, glass raised high. People leaned in, expecting wisdom or sweetness or gratitude. She thanked the caterers, the florist, the planner. She thanked her new family, her in-laws, her childhood best friend who held my hand through every decision. She lifted her glass toward the main table. To the people who made this day possible, she said, eyes shining, and my name was never spoken. I didn't wait for dessert. As the room erupted in applause around Seraphine's closing toast, I stood, pushed in my chair quietly, and slipped out the side exit. The night air was thick with humidity and something else I couldn't name, something that felt like being erased. The guest house I was staying at wasn't far. Ms. Josie, an old friend of our mother's, had insisted I take the spare room above her garage when I said I needed a place just for a few nights. She didn't ask why I wasn't staying with family. Maybe she already knew. By the time I walked up the creaky stairs to her guest room and locked the door behind me, the sounds of laughter and cutlery had become ghosts in my ears. I kicked off my shoes by the dresser, shrugged off the cardigan I'd kept on all night, more armor than fashion, and sat on the edge of the bed. The yellow lamplight made the room feel older, like time had settled in the corners and decided to stay. I opened my bag and reached for something I always traveled with. A small envelope, hand-sewn, lined with faded blue cotton. It wasn't much, but inside, it was everything. I pulled out a single photo. The edges had curled from age, the colors slightly washed, but it was still whole. Seraphine and I, ages 6 and 11, arms around each other on the front porch of Dad's house. I remember that day like it happened just last fall. He'd just taken us for ice cream, and we were covered in sticky smiles. Her hair was pulled back in pink barrettes. Mine was a frizzy halo of curls I hadn't yet learned to tame. On the back, her handwriting in blue pen. If we lose everything, at least I'll still have you. She wrote that when she was 17, after Dad died, after the will drama, after our mother spiraled into one of her phases. I ran my thumb over the ink. It had started to fade in spots, but not enough to forget, and suddenly I wasn't in Josie's guest room anymore. I was 17 again, in black tights and a wrinkled dress at Dad's funeral. I had held Seraphine's hand all through the service, and that night, when she collapsed into my lap on the couch, sobbing like a child, I wrapped both arms around her and whispered, "You're not alone." She had cried into my shirt, whispered back, "You're all I have. I'll never forget what you've done for me." And now, she'd forgotten. I set the photo down on the nightstand. My phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Ellie, one of our cousins on Dad's side. She'd always been decent to me, even when the others weren't. The text said, "Just saw the slideshow. They really didn't put one photo of you?" Below it, she'd attached a few screenshots. The first, Seraphine hugging Mom, both in silk robes. then one with her college roommates, laughing with mimosas in hand, another with her Pilates instructor and that blonde friend who always made backhanded comments at family dinners. But none with me, not one. No front porch photo, no sleepovers, no graduation cap toss, not even a grainy selfie from Christmases past, just absence. It wasn't just omission, it was a deliberate editing. I wasn't part of the story they wanted to tell, not to themselves, and definitely not to the crowd. I scrolled through the photos again, each one slapping harder than the last. Then I stopped, staring at one frame longer than the others. It was a photo taken in our childhood kitchen, except they'd cropped it. I remembered that day. I had been in it, holding the birthday cake from the oven, still in my apron. But in this version, only Mom, Seraphine, and the cake remained. They didn't forget me. They erased me. I set the phone face down on the quilt. My breath shook, but I wasn't crying. Not this time. What I felt wasn't grief. It wasn't even sadness anymore. It was recognition. They'd rewritten the past and done it so neatly, so politely, no one questioned it. I had stayed quiet so long, I became the silence they expected. I leaned forward and picked up the envelope. The photo slipped back inside with a soft rustle. I tucked it under my pillow, not out of sentimentality, but because part of me needed to know it was still there, still real. The other part? The other part was already planning tomorrow. As I lay back on the bed, I whispered into the stillness, "You used to say I was all you had. Now you act like I was never even here." I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, the whir of the old fan above me clicking like a clock. Let them celebrate. Let them toast to their perfect version of the past. But tomorrow? Tomorrow I'd walk into that wedding, not as the quiet sister, not anymore. I wasn't going to disappear. Not this time. The sky hadn't quite brightened when I slipped on the muted slate blue dress hanging from the closet door. It wasn't showy, not something Seraphine would have picked, but it fit. Simple lines, soft fabric, no fuss. I tied my hair back, light makeup, flats instead of heels, the kind of outfit that wouldn't scream for attention, but wouldn't fade into the wallpaper either. At least that's what I hoped. I arrived at the venue nearly an hour before the scheduled walkthrough. Morning dew still clung to the lawn as vendors moved carts of glassware through the back entrances. Inside, warm light spilled across mahogany floors, polished too bright. The floral arch was halfway assembled, white and blush roses arranged just so. Feminine, curated, flawless, like everything Seraphine touched. I stood near the entrance for a moment, quietly watching. No one turned. No one waved. I was just air. Somewhere down the corridor, I heard laughter, deep, carefree, rehearsed. I followed the sound, drawn more by instinct than intent, and peeked into the adjoining ballroom. There they were, our mother, Seraphine, her fiancé, and a smattering of carefully chosen guests. A photographer circled them, snapping portraits. Mom's arm curled protectively around Seraphine's waist, her other hand resting lightly on the groom's shoulder. Seraphine's laugh, sharp and full of performance, rang through the room as she leaned her cheek against his. The shot looked like a family magazine spread, except the family wasn't whole. I took a step back. My foot caught the edge of a floral runner. No one noticed. Later, in the atrium, I lingered near the refreshment table, pretending to sip coffee from a porcelain cup I hadn't actually filled. It felt easier to stand still than search for a seat I hadn't been assigned. That's when I heard it. "Thank you again," the wedding planner gushed to Seraphine and our mother. "You two did such an incredible job. And locking down this venue? No easy feat. Everything's just seamless." Seraphine smiled without blinking. "Well, we wanted it perfect." No correction, no mention of the fact that 60% of the deposit for that perfect came from a dormant trust Dad had left, one only I had access to. I had offered it quietly months ago when Seraphine said their funds were stretched too thin. She'd smiled, called me a lifesaver, and said she'd never forget. Apparently she had. I caught her eye across the room. She looked directly at me and didn't flinch. Not guilty, not grateful, just empty. There was a brief pause as a new group entered. Friends of the groom, I gathered. One woman, dressed in head-to-toe cream, clutched a binder and looked vaguely familiar. Seraphine turned toward them, gesturing smoothly. "Oh, and this is Vespera," she said lightly, her hand barely extending in my direction. "My little sister, she's kind of a quiet creative type, writes code or something." The group chuckled politely. Someone muttered just loud enough, "So she's not in the family business then?" I opened my mouth, closed it. Seraphine smiled, already turning away, launching into a story about their honeymoon plans. Paris, then Santorini. Because, of course. I drifted to the edge of the room, found an empty chair tucked along the wall behind a cluster of floral arrangements. From there, I watched the scene unfold as if through glass. My stomach twisted, not because they didn't see me, but because they did and still acted like I had no weight. "They don't see me," I whispered to no one. But worse, they're pretending I've never mattered at all. I don't know how long I sat there. I only know that I didn't move until a man, a stranger, maybe in his 60s, approached and sat beside me. His gray suit was a little wrinkled, and he had kind eyes. "Mind if I sit?" he asked gently. I shook my head. He sat without ceremony, adjusting his cuff. Then, after a pause, he said, "I'm from the groom's side. Don't know many folks here, but I keep hearing the same two things. How beautiful this venue is, and how smooth the check-in software was." I blinked. "Funny, though," he added. "No one seems to mention the person who set all that up." My throat tightened. I gave a faint smile, didn't answer. I didn't need to. He patted his knee, stood again. Some things speak louder when left unsaid. And then he walked away. I watched him go, his back steady and sure. Then, slowly, I stood too. I left the ballroom. My shoes tapped down the stone hallway toward the back garden where the ceremony would be held later. Rows of empty chairs faced the arbor. White ribbon curled from the breeze. The scent of roses was overwhelming. I walked all the way to the last row and stopped. They wanted me to be a ghost? Fine. I knew how to vanish. I'd been trained for it. But this time I wouldn't haunt the background. I'd haunt the story. They erased me with polite smiles. I'd write myself back in, on my terms. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the oaks as I made my way back toward the prep tent behind the main hall. The hush of pre-ceremony nerves lingered in the air, stylists rushing past with curling irons, planners murmuring into headsets, the hum of a string quartet rehearsing nearby. I kept to the side, careful not to interfere. Then a young man in a vest and bow tie approached me. He held a sealed envelope. "This was left for you," he said, smiling like he thought it might be a love note. I took it with a polite nod, stepping aside to a narrow gap between two staging tables to read it privately. Inside was a typed invoice. The letterhead bore the wedding company's name. Below, a list of final charges for the ceremony space, floral arch, audio system, and digital guest check-in. A line at the bottom read, "Outstanding balance covered via sponsorship credit. Contact Vespera Crowley." My breath caught. I scanned the page again. Surely this was a clerical error, a crossed wire. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't even spoken with this vendor directly. And yet, there it was. In fine print, beneath the signature line, "Email confirmation received, Vespera.Crowley." I blinked. I didn't remember authorizing anything. I'd been careful, so careful, with the trust fund Dad left behind. The account had sat untouched for nearly 2 years. I'd only unlocked a portion to help Seraphine secure the venue when she said their budget couldn't stretch. Back then, it felt like a gesture, a gift, not a financial obligation I'd be repaying for the next 5 years. I stepped outside, heart pounding. Behind a pillar near the fountain, I pulled out my phone, opened my email, searched the terms. Nothing came up. But when I messaged my accountant, just in case, his reply landed within seconds. Yes, Vespera, you authorized a bridge credit line 6 weeks ago for this event. I forwarded confirmation to the planning office. I froze. 6 weeks ago, I was in Austin, managing a software rollout, buried in back-to-back meetings. I didn't have time to breathe, let alone finance a wedding. I scrolled further down. Attached was a PDF, a signed authorization form. My name, my digital signature, my email, all lined up like clockwork. But I didn't sign it. I walked in circles along the outer perimeter of the tent, the sounds of music and laughter warping in the background. Then I spotted her. Seraphine stood near the center aisle, surrounded by peonies and praise. Her dress glimmered in the afternoon light as she adjusted a pearl hairpin. For a moment, she looked weightless, untouchable, regal. I cut through the tent quietly, tapped her shoulder. She turned, surprised, then smiled like I'd asked for a selfie. "We need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm. She motioned to the side, clearly not wanting an audience. We stepped behind the seating chart display. "I got an invoice," I said, "with my name as the sponsor." Seraphine's eyes didn't waver. "So?" "I never agreed to that, and my accountant says I authorized a credit line." She gave a breathy laugh, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "You said you wanted to help. I just finalized things. It's not a big deal." I stared at her. "You forged my signature." "Oh, Vespera, don't be dramatic." She rolled her eyes. "You always overreact." "Do I?" My voice dropped. "It was a formality," she continued. "You have better credit. I didn't think you'd care. And look, everything turned out beautiful." That word, formality, lodged in my throat like a splinter. "You took my name," I said slowly, "and turned it into debt." She sighed. "Why are you making this about you? This day isn't about you." And just like that, she turned and walked back toward the florists, as if the conversation were over, as if I were a noise she could mute. I walked away in silence. Through the back corridor, down a narrow hall, I found a restroom that hadn't been occupied yet. I slipped inside and locked the door behind me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just slid to the floor, the cool tile pressing against my back as I stared at the ceiling. Every moment I'd kept my mouth shut, every favor I'd given, every lie I'd let slide because that's just how she is. She hadn't just forgotten me, she'd used me. And for what? A few hours of shine? A storybook photo? I stood after what felt like years, washed my hands, and returned to the reception as dusk settled in. The ballroom sparkled with candlelight. Guests buzzed with champagne. The first dance was about to begin. I stayed in the shadows near the arched doorway. Seraphine floated across the dance floor like she was gliding on air. Her new husband held her tight, their faces close, whispering sweet nothings. The crowd sighed as if watching a movie. No one looked behind the scenes, but I did. I saw the wires, the cracks, the carefully hidden strings she'd pulled to keep her image untarnished, and for the first time, I didn't feel sad. I felt sharp. In the corner of my phone's screen was a folder I'd labeled Quiet Ledger. Inside were screenshots of everything: email timestamps, trust account movements, Seraphine's messages from months ago asking for just a little help. I had it all. I tapped through one by one, slowly, methodically. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to ruin tonight. Because tomorrow wasn't for her. It was for the truth. She may have borrowed my name, but tomorrow she'll remember it. I had everything I needed except their permission, and I didn't need it anymore. Back at my table, the clinking of dessert forks and the hum of champagne-fueled laughter surrounded me like static. The reception was in full bloom, centerpieces glowing, the playlist now pivoting into breezy classics. I sat perfectly still, hands folded, watching people I used to know act like I was someone they'd never met. My phone buzzed softly in my clutch. It was a text from an old college friend, Sophia. We hadn't spoken in years, but the message simply read, "Isn't this the box you gave your sister? Thought you might want to see." Below it, a link. I tapped it, almost without thinking. The page opened to a resale site. Antique, high-end, Charleston-based, and there it was, the jewelry box. Small, cherry wood, with a brass inlay shaped like winding ivy, and a single S&V monogram etched in the corner, listed as pristine condition, never used. The description read, "Elegant gift box with vintage detailing, received as a wedding present but never opened, too sentimental to keep, selling due to space." I felt my breath catch, not in my throat, but behind my ribs, like something had caved inward. I had found that box in a dusty little antique store in Boston, just off Tremont. It was the kind of place where the floorboards creaked with stories, where nothing had price tags and everything had a soul. When I saw it, I knew. Our mother used to keep letters in a box like that, birthday wishes, Father's Day cards, handwritten notes from a husband who vanished too early. That box was memory, anchor, heartbeat. Seraphine used to pull it down and read them like bedtime stories, and I had written inside the lid of this new one, in careful gold ink, "For your next chapter, with all my love. V." I had it shipped to Charleston weeks before the wedding, wrapped in soft blue paper. She sold it. I rose quietly from the table. No one noticed. Not one head turned. I walked through the far side of the ballroom, past the curtain that separated guests from staff, into a narrow hallway filled with discarded coat hangers, cardboard boxes, and the dull whir of industrial fans. It smelled faintly of lemons and something metallic. I leaned against the wall. I didn't cry. I just stood there, the glow from my phone still illuminating the listing. Her name wasn't on it, but the initials were unmistakable. I whispered, mostly to myself, I wasn't invited. I wasn't acknowledged. Now I've been erased and pawned off? There was no bitterness in my voice, just a weight. Like grief had stopped asking for permission to be felt and simply settled in as part of my spine. Somewhere deeper in the corridor, I heard a shift in footsteps, rubber soles. A girl in a black button-up shirt and a server's apron emerged from the side hall, tray in hand, clearly looking for somewhere quiet to breathe. She paused when she saw me. "Sorry," she said quickly. "Didn't mean to interrupt." I shook my head. "You're not." She hesitated, then gently set her tray down. From her pocket, she pulled a folded cloth napkin. Not one of the generic ones. This one was cream-colored, stitched with a delicate gold SC. She held it out to me. "I noticed earlier. They didn't give you one." I blinked. She smiled faintly. "Don't let them decide your value. They don't get to." Then she turned, picked her tray back up, and disappeared through the opposite hallway. I looked down at the napkin in my hands. It wasn't just linen. It was acknowledgement, from someone who didn't know my name, my past, my role, but saw me anyway. That napkin weighed more than the box Seraphine sold. It felt heavier than all the smiles I faked, all the silences I'd swallowed to keep things civil. I walked slowly back through the rear hallway and into the venue's unused side wing. It was quiet there. A few dim sconces lit the wall. I sat on an empty bench, holding the napkin like a message in Morse. There are moments in life where your sadness stops pleading for dignity and begins building armor. This was one of those. I pulled out my phone again. Folder. Quiet ledger. I opened it. Inside were layers of digital breadcrumbs, screenshots of the forged email, trust fund notifications, tax forms that didn't match, text messages she thought I'd deleted. I'd kept it all, not out of spite, not even out of paranoia. I just learned, somewhere along the line, that people like Seraphine remember what serves them, and forget what doesn't. And if you don't hold the record, you'll vanish in someone else's version of events. I scrolled past the invoice from the caterer, past the florist emails, back to the initial contract she asked me to look over casually 3 months ago. Back then, I thought helping her meant preserving peace, but what she really wanted was control. The music shifted in the distance, a slow song now, the kind you use to clear the dance floor and welcome toasts. I stood, smoothed my dress, folded the napkin once more and tucked it into my clutch. Not tonight. Tonight, I'd keep my mouth closed, because sometimes you don't speak to shame them. You wait until silence is no longer their shield. By the time the third round of champagne was poured and the band eased into its second set, I'd found my way back to the main hall. I sat near the bar, away from the spotlight but not hidden. Not anymore. My clutch sat beside me, unopened now, its weight no longer intimidating, just familiar. The air buzzed with reception chatter, polite laughter, and the clink of glass against glass. Waiters glided between tables, and photographers crouched near pillars, capturing curated moments. No one was looking at me, yet. Then a man in a tailored charcoal suit approached, holding a coupe glass and wearing the easy confidence of someone used to VIP lounges. "You're Vespera, right?" I straightened slightly. "Yes." He leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to feel conspiratorial. "Are you the one who built the registration platform they're using? The guest QR, table tracking, food preferences, whole system?" Caught off guard, I hesitated, then nodded. He let out a quiet whistle. "You saved our entire staff from 3 weeks of chaos. I run ops at the Marigold Group. Seraphine said it was all done in-house." "She wasn't wrong," I said. "I was the house." He smiled, lifted his glass slightly. "Well, cheers to the genius behind the curtain." He moved on, but not before leaving a ripple in the atmosphere around me. It didn't take long. Within an hour, whispers found wings. A woman with silver blonde hair in a navy sheath dress leaned in and asked if I was the platform girl. A man with a press badge clipped discreetly to his jacket, someone from a regional tech journal, politely asked if I was taking new clients. A younger couple complimented the seamless process and asked if I offered custom software for nonprofit galas. I didn't need to say much. Just smile, listen, let the current move. And across the room, I could feel her watching. Seraphine stood with a photographer and 2 bridesmaids, perfectly arranged, white wine glass held at a careful angle. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes did. She crossed the ballroom slowly, unhurried, as if it were her idea to join me. A flashbulb popped behind her as she approached. "Didn't realize you were working the crowd," she said with feigned amusement. "Networking tonight?" I met her gaze evenly. They came to me. "Well, aren't you the surprise of the evening?" I sipped from my glass, the bubbles biting just enough to steady my voice. "You erased me. They found me anyway." Her smile twitched. "I see. So this is your stage moment, is it?" "Funny," I said. "I never needed the stage, just a microphone." Her mouth tightened, but before she could respond, the MC's voice echoed through the hall, warm and booming. "We've got time for one last toast before we bring out the dessert. This one's special. A family member who's been there from the beginning." All heads began to turn. "Vespera? We'd love for you to say a few words." The name landed in the air like an unexpected firework. A few people clapped, others looked curious. I stood, smoothed the fabric of my gown and walked forward, slow but certain. The spotlight found me. My heels clicked softly on the parquet floor. I reached the mic, took a breath, then turned to the MC and shook my head gently. "Not yet." A hush settled across the room. Some chuckled awkwardly, assuming it was a joke. Others waited, unsure. I stepped down, turned away from the crowd, and walked, not back to my table, but to the far corner of the reception hall. There, tucked beside the AV equipment, sat a small table where my laptop rested, exactly where I left it earlier. I opened the screen, unlocked the files, scrolled through the receipts, the timeline, the altered PDFs, and every email Seraphine thought I hadn't noticed. The crowd didn't follow me, not yet. But the silence that fell behind me wasn't discomfort, it was anticipation. I'd given her every chance to tell the truth, and when she didn't, I gave her the stage, but now it was mine. The screen of my laptop glowed faintly in the shadows. Fingers still resting on the keys, I watched from a distance as the ballroom carried on in its oblivious rhythm, laughter rising and falling like tides, glasses clinking, small talk bubbling around chandeliers and candlelight. They thought the silence meant surrender, but silence can also be preparation. The MC, now slightly flushed from wine and long hours of smiling, stepped back to the center of the dance floor. "We have one final toast for the evening," he said, raising his hand. "A guest who's seen it all from the very beginning. Vespera, would you come up?" This time, I didn't hesitate. I closed my laptop, straightened my dress, walked forward, one step at a time, heels firm against polished wood. The crowd quieted before I even reached the microphone. This silence wasn't awkward. It was expectant. I took the mic, held it with both hands. "Hi," I began. "I'm Vespera. I wasn't asked to speak tonight, but sometimes silence can be mistaken for absence." The first wave of murmurs passed like a breeze through linen. "I'm not going to give a long speech," I said, eyes calmly sweeping the room. "I just want to offer some memories. My sister Seraphine has always been the star of the show, and I've always been behind the curtain. When she was 12 and terrified Dad wouldn't come home one night, I stayed up with her, reading under the hallway light so she wouldn't feel alone." A photo appeared on the projector screen behind me, not the one from the official slideshow. This one, grainy, warm, was from a disposable camera. Seraphine and me, bundled in blankets, her head on my shoulder, my eyes fixed on a book. A few guests glanced at the screen. Others stared straight at me. When the business went under and she had nowhere to go, she crashed on my couch for 6 weeks, said I saved her. Another photo appeared, her suitcase next to my Brooklyn apartment door, a pillow on the floor, a plate of leftover spaghetti. I didn't erase anyone. I just kept receipts. The room wasn't moving now. I could feel the weight of their eyes, the shift in their breathing. "Some of you may wonder how this wedding came together so seamlessly," I continued, voice steady. "Well, here's one answer." I tapped the keyboard on a nearby podium. The next slide, a PDF contract, digitally signed with my name on it, my email address, time-stamped, highlighted. "I paid for over 60% of this event," I said evenly. "Not through my company, through a trust account my father left, one I'd kept untouched, until 6 weeks ago." Gasps were audible now. Whispers snapped from one table to the next, like dry kindling. "Only," I looked up, "I didn't authorize this. Not directly. The signature was forged." That's when I saw her. Seraphine broke from the crowd, almost stumbling in her heels, a hand raised as if to bat away the moment. "This isn't the place for this," she barked, voice sharp and cracking. "You're embarrassing yourself." I didn't flinch. "No," I replied softly. "I'm making a record." With one more click, I flashed a screen of matching emails. Bank transfer history. Everything clean, sourced, and undeniable. She froze in front of me, inches from the mic, face pale. "You always wanted to be center stage," she hissed. "Guess you got it." I looked right at her. Funny, I never needed the stage, just a microphone. And then I turned, not to her, but to the rest of the room. "You laughed at me," I said, calm but clear. "You sat me by the kitchen. You sold the gift I chose with my heart. And when my name vanished from the program, from the slideshow, from every story told tonight, you said nothing. Because you assumed I'd say nothing too. A beat. 2. Then I shifted my gaze to Seraphine's in-laws. Before you decide who I am, maybe ask who made all of this even possible. Silence flooded the room like a burst dam. No clapping, no silverware scraping. Even the DJ's hand hovered above the controls, frozen. And from the back corner, a soft voice rose. "Ma'am," it said, "thank you, for your grace." Tamsin, the young server from earlier. She stood there quietly, napkin still folded in her hand like a flag of decency in a room gaslit by decorum, and for the first time all night, they looked at me like I was real. The ballroom lights had dimmed to a quiet gold. The music faded into ambient whispers as the crowd began to thin. I slipped out without saying goodbye. I didn't need applause. I didn't need hugs. I needed air. The elevator ride to the rooftop felt like floating. No floor beneath me, just thoughts and fragments. When the doors opened, the Charleston night spilled in. Warm, humid, still laced with the scent of gardenia and champagne. She was already there. Seraphine sat alone on a wicker bench near the edge. Her heels were off, her gown slightly wrinkled, bouquet lying on the ground like it had been dropped hours ago and never picked up. Her back was curled inward, hands clasped tight in her lap, mascara streaked beneath her eyes like war paint faded by time and salt. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. She turned. Our eyes met under the halo of rooftop string lights. Something passed between us. Not regret, not anger. Recognition, maybe. Or the final breath before closure. She looked away first. The silence stretched. Then, barely audible, she muttered, "You made your point." I took a step closer, enough for her to hear, but not enough to close the distance. "I didn't come to prove anything," I said. "I came because you used to say I was all you had." The words hung in the humid air. She flinched just slightly. "Now I know what that really meant," I added quietly. I didn't wait for a reply. There wasn't one that could matter anymore. Back in my hotel room, I moved through the space slowly. The mirror reflected someone different than the woman who'd arrived 2 days ago, someone clearer, straighter, untangled. My hands moved on instinct, collecting the last of my things, folding dresses, checking drawers. Then I paused. I pulled an envelope from my travel pouch, scribbled her name on the front, and walked it down to the front desk. "Please make sure this is delivered to Mrs. Seraphine Lark," I told the receptionist. First thing in the morning. Inside the envelope, the childhood photo of us, arms wrapped around each other on the porch, still faded from years in my wallet. Tucked behind it, a printed screenshot of the antique jewelry box listing, labeled unused, priced like any other thing she didn't value. And one more item, a single yellow post-it. "Erase me if you want, but you'll always remember who built what you stood on." I walked out into the stillness of 4 a.m., suitcase gliding beside me. The airport was hushed, full of groggy travelers and rolling luggage. Security lines moved quickly. I passed through without being stopped or seen. By the time I boarded, the sky was beginning to gray. On the plane, I reached into my bag and found the second envelope I'd carried with me from New York. I hadn't opened it in months. My fingers slid across the flap. Inside, the same photo from long ago. Seraphine, 6. Me, 11. Sitting on the steps with chalk-dusted jeans, grinning like the world had nothing but promise. On the back, her handwriting in teenage ink. "If we lose everything, at least I'll still have you." My fingers traced the ink slowly. I didn't cry. There were no tears left for what wasn't mine anymore. I whispered, "We did lose everything." Then I pressed the photo back into its envelope, and I found myself. When the plane touched down in New York, the city met me like it always did, indifferent, electric, honest. I walked through arrivals without looking back. Later that morning, I stepped into my office. The lights were on, soft, warm. Tamsin was there by the corner window, eyes lighting up when she saw me. "Everyone's talking about your speech," she said, setting down a stack of folders. I smiled, not the kind I used to fake. "Let them," I answered. "I'm done being unspoken." She nodded. I walked to the window and looked out at the streets below. Taxis blurring past, sirens somewhere in the distance. It was loud and alive and mine. There was peace in knowing I didn't need to shout anymore. The story had been told. I thought of every moment I had swallowed words, every time I chose stillness when fire was deserved, and I knew, with a calmness that didn't tremble, you can disappear for years, be quiet, be kind, be erased, but one day, if you choose, you can speak. And when you do, make sure they never forget your name again. And I didn't just walk away from that wedding, I walked back into my name.